Diane Whitmore thought she was about to remove just another unwanted guest from the Grand Crescent Hotel, but she had no idea that within minutes, every polished smile in that marble lobby would collapse into panic. Claire Bennett stepped through the revolving glass doors with a quiet breath, her beige coat folded neatly over one arm and a simple canvas tote hanging from her shoulder. Around her, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across imported Italian floors, while men in tailored suits and women draped in silk evening wear moved toward the ballroom with the smooth confidence of people accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. Claire looked nothing like them, and Diane noticed that instantly. From behind the glossy walnut reception desk, Diane's perfectly manicured fingers paused above the keyboard as her eyes traveled slowly over Claire's flat shoes, modest slacks, and unbranded sweater. It was the kind of look that made judgments before words were ever spoken. Claire approached with the small, polite smile of someone trying not to inconvenience anyone. "Hi, I'm checking in under Bennett," she said softly. Diane's smile appeared, but only the professional version, the kind with no warmth behind it. "Of course," she replied, typing the name. For a split second, something flashed on the screen. Diane saw the presidential suite, the private ballroom reservation, the executive welcome note. But then her eyes returned to Claire's clothing, and disbelief hardened her face. This had to be some mistake. People attached to reservations like this did not arrive carrying canvas bags. "Can I see your ID?" Diane asked, her tone already cooler. Claire handed it over without hesitation. Diane glanced at it, then set it down as if unconvinced by the very existence of the woman standing in front of her. Nearby, a young receptionist named Ethan pretended to organize room keys while listening closely. A wealthy older couple waiting for valet service turned their heads with mild curiosity. Claire remained calm. She had come 20 minutes early for one simple reason. Tonight was supposed to be a surprise for her husband, William Bennett. After months of negotiations, conference calls, legal reviews, and cross-country flights, he was finally closing the acquisition of Bennett Hospitality's newest flagship property, this very hotel. Claire had insisted on arriving separately so she could oversee one small personal detail before he entered, a quiet anniversary gift waiting upstairs in the presidential suite, away from the cameras and board members. She wanted it intimate, simple, and real. She had no idea simplicity was the very thing now being used against her. Diane clicked her nails against the desk. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett, but I'm not seeing an active reservation available for guest access." Claire blinked once. "That's strange. My husband's office confirmed it this morning." Diane offered a thin smile. "I'm sure they did." The words floated out dipped in condescension. Ethan glanced sideways, sensing where this was going. Claire gently pulled out her phone. "I have the confirmation email if that helps." Diane didn't even look. "Ma'am, premium accommodations here are reserved for verified executive guests." The emphasis on verified landed like a quiet insult. Claire slowly lowered her phone. Around them, the lobby seemed to soften into that dangerous kind of silence where strangers begin pretending not to watch while watching everything. A bell cart rolled past. Champagne glasses clinked from the lounge. Somewhere above, ballroom doors opened for the evening gala. Diane leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound controlled and just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Are you certain you're in the correct hotel, Ms. Bennett?" Claire felt the heat rise into her cheeks. Not from confusion, from recognition. She knew this tone, the polished cruelty of wealthy spaces. The assumption that anyone dressed simply must have wandered too far from where they belonged. She swallowed, held her dignity, and answered with quiet certainty. "Yes, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Diane Whitmore almost laughed. In less than 10 minutes, she would wish she hadn't. Claire held Diane Whitmore's stare for 2 long seconds, then placed her phone carefully on the marble counter and opened the confirmation email with steady fingers. The glowing screen displayed everything clearly: presidential suite reservation, private executive access, and a handwritten note from Bennett Hospitality's acquisitions office requesting discreet preparation before the chairman's arrival. Claire turned the screen so Diane could see it. For the briefest moment, Ethan's eyes widened. He recognized the company letterhead immediately, but Diane did not react the way any reasonable employee would have. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, as if evidence itself had become an insult to her authority. "Anyone can fabricate an email," she said crisply. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her. Diane, that looks like, I did not ask for commentary, Ethan. Her interruption was sharp enough to silence him. Claire slowly inhaled. She had spent years in rooms where appearances spoke louder than facts. Charity banquets, donor meetings, old money social clubs. There was always someone who mistook quietness for weakness. Usually she let it slide. Usually William stepped in before things reached this point. But tonight William was still across town finishing signatures with attorneys, expecting to arrive with the regional board in less than half an hour. Claire had promised herself she could handle one simple hotel check-in alone. Now she was no longer sure whether she felt embarrassed, angry, or simply tired. Diane folded her hands with rehearsed superiority. Ms. Bennett, premium guests do not typically arrive unannounced carrying tote bags and vague digital confirmations. The older couple near valet exchanged a knowing glance. Ethan looked down at the desk. Claire felt the sting of every word because Diane was making certain each one landed publicly. This was no longer a verification issue. It was a performance, a demonstration of who belonged under crystal chandeliers and who did not. My husband reserved this suite personally, Claire said, keeping her voice level. If there is confusion, I am happy to wait in the lounge until he arrives. Diane gave a small, humorless smile. The lounge is restricted this evening to gala attendees and executive invitees. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing that sentence while standing under her own husband's company logo mounted in gold behind the desk, but she swallowed it. Losing composure here would only feed the scene Diane was building. From the grand staircase, more guests descended toward the ballroom entrance. Sequin gowns shimmered under the chandelier light. Tuxedoed waiters carried silver trays of champagne flutes. The contrast was almost theatrical now, elegance flowing effortlessly around one woman being quietly frozen in place. A young bellboy named Marcus approached from the luggage corridor, pushing a brass cart. He glanced at Claire, then at the reservation screen Ethan had failed to close. His forehead tightened. "Excuse me, Ms. Whitmore," he said cautiously. "Is that the Bennett executive check-in?" "Mr. Holloway told us the chairman's." Diane turned on him with a smile, so thin it looked dangerous. "Thank you, Marcus. Return to your station." The bellboy stopped speaking at once. Claire noticed it then. This was not confusion. This was pride refusing correction. Diane had committed to the judgment the moment she saw Claire's clothes, and now every new fact simply made her dig in deeper. Ethan cleared his throat. "Maybe we should call Mr. Holloway from upstairs, just to verify." Diane slammed one manicured nail on the counter. "There is nothing to verify. We have a woman claiming access to a presidential suite she clearly does not belong in." The sentence echoed farther than she intended. Several nearby guests turned fully now. Claire felt dozens of eyes on her. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her canvas tote. For the first time that evening, humiliation crept coldly down her spine. She had wanted this night to begin with a private smile and an anniversary surprise. Instead, she was being displayed like a suspicious inconvenience in the middle of a five-star lobby. Diane lifted the house phone, her expression perfectly composed. "Since this matter appears to be escalating," she said, "I believe security should assist us." Ethan's face drained. Marcus stood frozen by the luggage cart. Claire did not move. Somewhere deep in the hotel, elevator doors opened with a soft chime. And fate, at last, was beginning to move. The house phone clicked softly as Diane Whitmore requested lobby security with the same calm tone someone might use to ask for fresh flowers. That was what made it worse. Not anger, not shouting, just that polished certainty that Claire Bennett had become a problem to be removed before the important guests noticed too much. But they had already noticed. Conversations near the champagne bar had lowered into whispers. A woman in an emerald gown leaned toward her companion. Two businessmen near the elevators paused mid-discussion. Even the pianist in the lounge seemed to disappear beneath the tightening silence. Claire stood exactly where she was, shoulders straight, chin lifted, refusing to give Diane the satisfaction of seeing panic. Yet inside, a slow ache spread across her chest. It was not fear of being thrown out. It was the familiar sting of being reduced to an appearance, to a pair of sensible shoes and an unremarkable sweater, as if dignity itself had a dress code. Ethan shifted from one foot to the other. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly, trying one last time, "I really think we should contact Mr. Holloway." This reservation is linked to executive acquisition access. Diane turned toward him with a look that could have chilled fire. Ethan, if you would like to continue working at this hotel, I suggest you remember who is managing this desk tonight. Ethan swallowed and stepped back. Marcus, still gripping the brass luggage cart, looked as though he wanted to speak again but thought better of it. Claire noticed both young men and understood something important. Not everyone here was cruel. Some were simply afraid of the woman who had made cruelty look professional. Diane replaced the receiver and folded her hands. Security will escort you out discreetly, Miss Bennett. There is no need to make this more uncomfortable than it already is. Claire almost smiled at the irony. Diane had spent the last 10 minutes making certain it was as uncomfortable as possible. I am not trying to cause a scene, Claire replied. Neither am I, Diane said, though the faint upward tilt of her mouth suggested otherwise. Then came the final insult, delivered in a tone sweet enough to poison the entire room. This property hosts individuals of a certain profile. I am sure there are many lovely hotels in the city better suited to your circumstances. A hush fell so completely that Claire could hear the distant ticking of the grandfather clock near the concierge stand. There it was, no longer hidden beneath policy language or verification excuses. Diane had finally said what she believed. You do not belong among these people. Claire felt heat flood her face, but she did not look away. She thought of William, of the years they had built their life intentionally free from gaudy displays. Of all the mornings she wore simple clothes because comfort mattered more than status. Of all the children her foundation fed and educated without caring what labels were on their jackets. And standing there beneath $10 million of imported crystal, she realized something almost absurdly clear. The most expensive places often contained the cheapest judgments. Two security officers emerged from the corridor beside the elevators, their dark suits crisp, their earpieces glinting under the chandelier light. They approached with measured professionalism, unaware they were walking into a catastrophe disguised as routine procedure. Diane nodded toward Claire. This guest does not have verified authorization to remain on the premises. One of the guards offered Claire an apologetic expression. Ma'am, if you would come with us, we can help you outside while this is sorted out. Outside. The word hit harder than Claire expected. Outside the hotel her husband was about to own. Outside the gala she had spent weeks helping plan. Outside the anniversary evening she had hoped would begin with joy. Claire tightened her grip on the tote bag and drew one slow breath. She was seconds away from stepping aside simply to preserve what little dignity remained when the revolving front doors began to turn, and a gust of cold evening air swept across the marble floor. The cold air touched Claire Bennett's face a half-second before the lobby changed. One of the security officers turned instinctively toward the entrance. The wealthy couple by. Valet stopped whispering. Ethan looked up from the desk. Even Diane Whitmore's expression shifted, though only slightly, as the revolving doors completed their slow turn and a tall man in a navy overcoat stepped inside. William Bennett never needed to announce himself. Authority seemed to move with him the way light follows polished steel. Behind him came three others in dark tailored suits. Jonathan Holloway, the regional operations director, a corporate attorney carrying a leather portfolio, and the acquisitions consultant who had spent 6 months negotiating tonight's closing documents. Their dress shoes clicked across the marble in a measured rhythm that somehow sounded louder than the entire lobby had moments before. Claire saw William immediately, and for the first time that evening, her shoulders loosened. She had expected relief. What she felt instead was something quieter and far sharper. Diane Whitmore had just made the mistake of humiliating her in front of the one man who noticed every detail. William's eyes moved across the room with practiced speed. He saw the two security officers flanking Claire. He saw Ethan's pale face. He saw Marcus frozen beside the brass cart. And then he saw Diane standing behind the desk with that managerial smile still half attached to her lips. William stopped walking. Jonathan Holloway, 2 steps behind him, followed his gaze toward Claire and visibly blanched. Oh no, he muttered under his breath. The corporate attorney lowered his portfolio. The acquisitions consultant looked from Claire to Diane with the dawning horror of a man watching a multi-million-dollar public relations disaster unfold in real time. Diane, however, was still trying to understand why every executive who had entered behind this distinguished stranger suddenly looked ill. She straightened her blazer and stepped forward with polished hospitality. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Crescent. We are just resolving a minor guest issue. William did not answer her greeting. His eyes remained on Claire. Are you all right? He asked. The softness in his voice cut through the room more sharply than anger ever could. Claire nodded once. I am fine. Now. Diane's smile flickered. She looked from William to Claire, then back again, her confidence beginning to crack around the edges. Jonathan Holloway rushed forward so quickly he nearly stumbled on the marble. Mrs. Bennet, he said, horrified. I am deeply sorry. We were expecting you upstairs. Ethan closed his eyes for one full second, as if praying to disappear. Marcus actually dropped his gaze to the floor. One of the security officers took a discreet step backward. Diane Whitmore stood motionless. The name hit her first. Bennet. Then the title. Mrs. Bennet. Her mind scrambled through the reservation screen she had ignored, the executive note she had dismissed, the presidential suite she had assumed was impossible, and the reality arrived all at once like ice water down her spine. She turned slowly toward William. Mrs. Bennet, she repeated, but the words came out dry and thin. Jonathan Holloway looked at her with undisguised disbelief. Yes, Diane. Mrs. Claire Bennet. Chairman William Bennet's wife. The room did not merely go quiet. It seemed to stop breathing. The older couple near valet stared openly now. The businessmen by the elevators lowered their phones. A waiter carrying champagne nearly froze mid-step. Diane's manicured fingers tightened against the reception desk. Color drained from her face so quickly it looked as though someone had dimmed the lights behind her skin. William finally shifted his gaze from Claire to Diane, and when he spoke, his voice remained calm enough to be terrifying. Would someone care to explain, he said, why my wife was being escorted out of my hotel? No one answered at first, because there are moments when guilt becomes too heavy for language. Diane Whitmore opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a brittle smile that looked almost painful. Mr. Bennet, I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding guest verification procedures. William Bennet removed his gloves with deliberate calm and handed them to the acquisitions consultant without taking his eyes off her. A misunderstanding, he repeated, as if testing whether the phrase deserved to survive in the air. Jonathan Holloway stepped in. Immediately, his voice tight with alarm. Sir, I assure you, this is not how we intended to receive Mrs. Bennet. William lifted one hand slightly, silencing him. His attention returned to Diane, and somehow that quiet focus made the entire lobby feel smaller. Did my wife present identification? He asked. Diane swallowed. Yes. Did she present the reservation confirmation? Yes, but there were concerns about authenticity. Ethan made an involuntary sound beside her, the kind a person makes when a lie becomes physically unbearable to hear. William noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes flicked toward the young receptionist. Your name? Ethan Cole, sir. Mr. Cole, were there concerns about authenticity? Ethan hesitated for less than a heartbeat, then looked at Claire, at Diane, and finally at the floor he had spent the last 10 minutes wishing would open beneath him. No, sir, he said quietly. The reservation was valid from the beginning. The sentence landed with the clean precision of a judge's gavel. Diane's face emptied. Jonathan Holloway inhaled sharply. The two security officers stepped another inch backward, now desperate to become wallpaper. William nodded once, not in surprise, but in confirmation of what he had already deduced. I see. Claire watched him carefully. This was the version of William most competitors feared in boardrooms. The colder he became, the less chance anyone had of escaping the consequences. Diane rushed to recover. Mr. Bennet, I was only trying to protect the hotel's standards and ensure proper discretion for executive clientele. William finally turned fully toward the reception desk. The gold letters mounted behind Diane gleamed under chandelier light. Grand Crescent, a Bennet hospitality property. He looked at the sign, then back at her. You invoked standards several times tonight, I am told. Diane's lips trembled. Yes, sir. Then let us discuss standards. The lobby had gone so silent that even the pianist in the lounge had stopped playing. Guests stood motionless with champagne flutes suspended in midair. Claire could feel every eye in the room shifting from her humiliation to Diane's unraveling. William spoke evenly, each word polished and devastating. The first standard of luxury hospitality is not marble flooring. It is not imported chandeliers. It is not whether a guest arrives in silk or cashmere. He stepped closer. It is whether your staff can recognize dignity when it is standing directly in front of them. Diane's throat moved, but no sound emerged. Ethan stared straight ahead. Marcus looked as if he might never blink again. Jonathan Holloway removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, already calculating the damage report this evening would become. William's gaze hardened by a fraction. My wife was treated as suspicious because she dressed simply. She was publicly questioned despite valid credentials. She was denied access to a suite booked under my office, and security was summoned to escort her outside. He let the final word hang. Outside. The same word that had humiliated Claire minutes earlier now sounded like a formal indictment. Diane tried once more. Sir, I did not realize. William cut her off with surgical calm. Exactly. He turned his head slightly toward the gathering guests, many of whom were now openly staring. And that failure to realize is precisely why this hotel has a leadership problem. Claire saw it then. The precise instant Diane Whitmore understood this was no longer about an apology. This was about an ending. Her fingers slipped from the desk edge. Her perfect posture faltered. And for the first time all evening, the woman who had measured human worth by appearances looked painfully small. Diane Whitmore's lips parted, but whatever carefully rehearsed corporate apology she had planned seemed to die before reaching her tongue. William Bennett did not need to raise his voice. The weight of public shame was already doing the work for him. He turned slightly toward Jonathan Holloway. Mr. Holloway, how long has Ms. Whitmore been front desk manager? Jonathan straightened immediately. 3 years, sir. William gave a slow nod. 3 years of teaching staff that clothing determines credibility. Jonathan's face tightened. No, sir. William looked back at Diane. Yet that appears to be tonight's operating policy. Diane's shoulders, once rigid with authority, had begun to sink under the invisible pressure gathering around her. She tried again, this time with a trembling professionalism that sounded far less polished than before. Mr. Bennett, I assure you my intention was only to preserve the guest experience. Claire Bennett stood quietly a few feet away, listening to the sentence with a strange calm. Preserve the guest experience. What a refined way to describe humiliating someone in public. William glanced toward Claire, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes now, not rage, but disappointment that someone had dared place his wife in this position at all. Then he faced Diane once more. My wife is the guest experience, he said. She funds literacy programs through our foundation in 6 states. She personally designed the educational gala taking place in this ballroom tonight. Half the donors in this building are here because of her. The room seemed to absorb that revelation in stunned waves. The woman in the emerald gown lowered her champagne flute. The businessmen by the elevators exchanged startled looks. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Claire with something close to admiration. Diane looked as if each new fact was another floor disappearing beneath her feet. Claire had not merely belonged here. She had been central to the very event everyone had dressed to attend. William continued, his voice low and controlled. And despite all of that, none of those titles matter as much as this. She is a human being who walked into this hotel and was treated as lesser because she appeared ordinary. Diane's eyes glistened now, not with sympathy earned, but with the panic of someone realizing every witness in the room would remember this night. Jonathan Holloway stepped closer, trying to salvage institutional order. Sir, I can have human resources process an immediate administrative suspension. William shook his head faintly. Not yet. Those 2 words froze Jonathan in place. Diane blinked, confused for one desperate second, perhaps hoping she had been spared. She had not. William turned toward the 2 security officers. Gentlemen, thank you. You may return to your posts. The only person here who misrepresented authorization is not my wife. Both guards nodded with visible relief and retreated. A subtle murmur passed through the lobby. It was happening now, the invisible transfer of power every person present could feel. 10 minutes earlier, Claire had stood isolated beneath 1,000 judging eyes. Now those same eyes had shifted, and Diane Whitmore was the one trapped in the center of them. William looked to Ethan. Mr. Cole, did Mrs. Bennett remain courteous throughout this encounter? Ethan answered immediately. Yes, sir. Completely courteous. William nodded. And did she at any point create a disturbance? No, sir. Thank you. Then William faced Diane for what felt like the final accounting. You had a calm guest with valid credentials, executive clearance, and every opportunity to be treated respectfully. Instead, you manufactured suspicion because simplicity offended your assumptions. Diane's lower lip trembled. Sir, I am deeply sorry. William studied her for a moment, then delivered the sentence that drained the last of her composure. You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry that witnesses are standing here to see what it cost you. Diane's hand moved to the desk as if she needed support. The acquisitions consultant looked away. Jonathan Holloway exhaled slowly. Claire remained silent, but in that silence there was no triumph. Only the heavy recognition that arrogance always sounds strongest just before it collapses. And Diane Whitmore was collapsing in full view of the entire hotel. For several seconds, Diane Whitmore stood there with the stunned stillness of someone watching her career detach from her body in slow motion. Her carefully sprayed hair, her pressed navy blazer, the gold nameplate pinned above her heart, all of it suddenly looked like costume jewelry under the chandelier glare. William Bennett did not move to comfort the silence. He let it spread. He let every guest in that lobby sit inside it long enough to understand that this was no routine correction. This was a lesson. Jonathan Holloway shifted uneasily beside him, waiting for formal instruction, while the corporate attorney quietly opened his portfolio as if sensing documentation would soon be necessary. Claire Bennett watched Diane with a complicated heaviness. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt mostly tired. Tired that so many people in elegant places still confused modesty with insignificance. Tired that kindness had to be defended like a legal argument. Tired that William had walked into yet another room where respect was offered only after power was recognized. William finally spoke, and his tone had the finality of a signed contract. Ms. Whitmore, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Diane inhaled sharply as though the air itself had betrayed her. Sir, please, she whispered, taking an involuntary step forward. I have given this hotel everything. My record has been exemplary. William's face did not soften. Your record may show punctual reports and polished guest surveys, he said. But tonight it showed something far more important. It showed your instinct when confronted with someone you believed could offer you nothing. Diane's eyes darted around the lobby, perhaps searching for one sympathetic face. She found none. The wealthy couple by valet looked away in embarrassment. The woman in the emerald gown folded her arms. Even Ethan, who had once feared Diane's authority, no longer looked intimidated. He looked disappointed. That was somehow worse. Diane turned toward Claire then, as if the only remaining path to survival might be through the woman she had humiliated. Mrs. Bennett, she said, voice cracking, I sincerely apologize. I misjudged the situation. Claire met her eyes steadily. There was no cruelty in Claire's expression, and that absence made the moment feel even more exposed. Yes, Claire said softly, you did. Nothing more. No dramatic speech. No triumphant smile. Just the simple confirmation that the wound had been real. Diane lowered her gaze. Jonathan Holloway stepped beside the desk and removed her access badge with procedural efficiency. The tiny click of the lanyard clasp sounded strangely loud. In luxury spaces, power often changes hands through whispers, not explosions. Diane stared at the badge in his hand as if she no longer recognized the life attached to it. William turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole. Ethan straightened so quickly, he nearly knocked over the room key tray. Yes, sir. You attempted twice to recommend verification rather than assumption. Ethan blinked. Yes, sir. Good. Learn from tonight. Hospitality is not the art of identifying wealthy people. It is the discipline of treating every person as if they matter before you know whether they do. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Marcus, still beside the brass luggage cart, looked visibly relieved that someone had finally said aloud what everyone younger in that building had likely known for years. Claire felt William's hand gently touch the small of her back, a grounding gesture more intimate than any public defense. She looked up at him, and in his eyes she saw not just protectiveness, but regret that she had been left alone to absorb any of this. I am sorry, he murmured quietly enough that only she heard. Claire gave the smallest shake of her head. This had not been his failure. It had been the failure of a culture that polished floors more carefully than character. Jonathan cleared his throat. Sir, The gala donors are assembled in the ballroom. William nodded once, then looked toward the crowd of onlookers who had witnessed everything. Excellent, he said. Then perhaps they should all see what real standards look like. And with that, he turned toward Claire as the ballroom doors slowly began to open. The ballroom doors parted with a slow, silent elegance, and a wash of golden light spilled across the marble lobby like a curtain rising on the second act of a play no one had expected to witness. Inside, nearly 200 donors, board members, educators, and civic leaders stood beneath cascading chandeliers, their conversations blending with the soft strings of a chamber quartet. At the far end of the room, a 20-foot banner shimmered above the stage. The Bennett Foundation Annual Literacy Gala. Claire Bennett paused for half a breath when she saw it. Her name was not printed there, but her fingerprints were on every detail in that room. The scholarship envelopes at each table, the children's reading displays along the walls, the handwritten thank you cards arranged beside the donor plates. All of it had been chosen by the same woman Diane Whitmore had nearly escorted outside as an inconvenience. William offered Claire his arm, not theatrically, not possessively, simply with the quiet respect of a man restoring her rightful place. Claire took it. Together, they began walking toward the ballroom entrance. Something extraordinary happened in the lobby then. Guests who had moments earlier watched Claire with detached curiosity now stepped aside instinctively, creating a clear path down the center of the marble floor. No one was told to move. They simply did. Recognition has a strange gravity once truth enters the room. Ethan stood behind the desk in complete silence. Marcus lowered his head with a small smile of relief. Jonathan Holloway followed several steps behind, while Diane remained near the reception counter, motionless, stripped of title, watching the woman she had dismissed become the axis around which the entire evening now turned. As Claire crossed the threshold into the ballroom, conversations dissolved one table at a time. Heads turned. The quartet softened. Then the master of ceremonies, who had been preparing opening remarks, blinked in surprise and quickly straightened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice echoing through the crystal-lit hall, "please welcome Chairman William Bennett and Mrs. Claire Bennett." The applause began politely, then built, wave after wave, until it filled the room with a force that made several guests in the lobby flinch. Claire felt it wash over her, not as vanity, but as contrast. 10 minutes ago, she had been treated as though she did not belong in the building. Now the very people who funded the evening were rising to their feet. William guided her toward the front of the stage, but before they climbed the steps, Claire gently touched his sleeve. "One moment," she whispered. William looked at her, understood, and nodded. Claire turned back toward the open ballroom doors where the lobby and everyone in it could still see her clearly, including Diane Whitmore. Claire's voice, when she spoke, was soft, but the microphone caught every syllable. "Before tonight begins," she said, "I want to thank every guest who came here believing this gala stands for education, opportunity, and human dignity." The room quieted instantly. Diane's face tightened in the distance. Claire continued, "Those values only matter if we practice them when no spotlight is on us, especially with people who appear ordinary." A murmur rippled through the audience as the meaning settled over those who had witnessed the scene outside. Jonathan Holloway lowered his eyes. Ethan stared at Claire with open respect. Diane looked as though each word were another mirror held before her. Claire did not mention names. She did not retell the humiliation. She did not need to. "Tonight," she said, "let us remember that the simplest person in the room may still be the reason the room exists." The silence afterward was deeper than applause. It was the silence of people recognizing a truth they had not expected to be taught at a black-tie gala. Then William began clapping first. One by one, the entire ballroom rose with him. And out in the lobby, under the same chandeliers where arrogance had stood so tall, Diane Whitmore could do nothing but watch respect return to the woman she had tried to erase. The applause lingered longer than anyone expected, not because Claire Bennett had delivered a dramatic speech, but because simple truth tends to echo in rooms built on appearances. As guests slowly returned to their seats, William guided Claire to the front table reserved for board leadership, yet even there she remained the calmest person in the ballroom. She adjusted the folded note cards beside the scholarship envelopes, thanked the startled waiter who offered sparkling water, and sat down with the same composed grace she had carried while being treated like an intruder only minutes earlier. That quiet steadiness did more than any public revenge could have done. It exposed the difference between power that is worn and dignity that is lived. Across the room, whispers spread table to table. Donors who had witnessed the lobby scene shared it with those who had not. Names were not necessary. Everyone understood enough. Jonathan Holloway moved swiftly into damage control, speaking in hushed tones with human resources, legal staff, and the evening coordinator. Diane Whitmore had disappeared from the reception desk, escorted not by security, but by the heavy realization that a title can vanish faster than arrogance expects. Ethan now stood at the front desk alone, shoulders straighter than before, greeting each arriving guest with a sincerity that seemed newly learned. Marcus rolled luggage through the corridor with a faint smile, as though the entire hotel had just exhaled after years of holding its breath. William leaned toward Claire during the opening donor presentation. "I can postpone the gala if you want to leave," he murmured. Claire turned to him and shook her head. "No," she said softly. "Too many children are depending on tonight. One person's judgment does not get to rewrite that." William looked at her for a moment with the kind of admiration that money cannot purchase and influence cannot imitate. This was why he had fallen in love with her long before the acquisitions, the private jets, or the magazine covers. Claire never needed a room to recognize her worth in order to carry it. When her turn came to address the audience formally, she stepped to the podium beneath the Bennett Foundation banner. Hundreds of eyes followed her, some with curiosity, some with guilt, many with respect. Claire unfolded her speech, then set it aside. "This evening is about literacy," she began. "But literacy is more than reading words on a page. It is learning how to read people with compassion instead of assumption." The ballroom went silent again. "Children learn from what we fund," she continued. "But they also learn from how we treat the quiet person standing in front of us when we think no one important is watching." Several guests lowered their eyes. William remained still, letting her words do what his authority no longer needed to do. Claire smiled gently then, removing any trace of accusation and replacing it with something far more enduring. "The world does not become kinder through chandeliers, uniforms, or polished marble. It becomes kinder one ordinary interaction a day." Time. When she finished, the standing ovation rose instantly. Not for wealth, not for status, for character. Later that night, after the final scholarship checks were awarded and the donors drifted into chauffeured cars beneath the city lights, Claire and William paused in the now quiet lobby. The chandeliers still glittered. The marble still shone. Yet the room felt entirely different, as if luxury had finally been forced to answer to humanity. Ethan approached with a small envelope. "Mrs. Bennett," he said nervously, "this was found in the presidential suite. I think housekeeping placed your anniversary gift by the window." Claire opened it and smiled at the handwritten card she had prepared hours earlier,